the first thing and the most important thing anytime I'm going to give a presentation, whether it's wedding speech related or to our corporate group or even at a conference, is I want to put myself in the shoes of the people who will be in the audience. And I always ask myself, if I was sitting in that seat, what would I want? Like, what kind of information would be interesting to me? Whether we can be interactive or not, like, is that something I'd want? I think about myself having to sit through a bunch of boring conversations and speeches before. Like, how can I avoid that? And so I always want to put myself in their shoes and think, okay, if I didn't know the bride or the groom or whoever's getting married very well, what would I want? What would be interesting to me?
Hey there, and welcome to yet another episode of the World of Presentations podcast, brought to you by us at 56 Labs. My name is Boris, and I'm your host for today's episode. However, today, who do we have with us today? I wrote some things before I started this episode because I think we need an introduction, everybody. All right, so who do we have here? I got introduced to him through Scott Allen, who was part of our podcast episodes like 2 or 3 episodes ago. And whoever is listening to this one, you should definitely check the episode with Scott also. All right. So back on the important thing now, who is our guest today, right? He actually he has written a book on a topic that we haven't discussed yet on this podcast. And this is, by the way, no one knows this, by the way, Pete, but this is actually episode number 95. All right.
95.
95. And we still haven't discussed the topic. So the book, obviously you heard that his first name is Pete, but the book that Pete wrote is called Wedding Toasts One-on-One. And obviously you can find it on Amazon and the most popular places out there. Now, very few people know that I'm also about to get married in September 2022. So when Pete approached and when Scott introduced us, I was like, probably I need to do this episode not just for our listeners, but for myself too, and that's how I was like, let's do that one. I think it will be super fun. So everyone, let's welcome Pete Honsberger to our podcast. Pete, welcome. How did you end up being in the presentation space or in the communication space? Because everyone has a very, unusual story of how they end up doing what they're doing. So what happened on your end? Like, how did you what happened so that you wrote a book on wedding toasts? Like, how that happened?
Great question. Well, and it's probably like a lot of other guests in that it's a long and winding story. Essentially, believe it or not, my interest in communications and presentations began in athletics. So I grew up playing American football as well as basketball. From when I was a child up through college, I played football. And I was always fascinated with why certain coaches were more motivating than others. And there were a lot of different attributes to that. Some coaches were really good at presenting to the group and getting people excited for the games and fired up. Some were not as motivating. And then even in a one-on-one setting, there's a presentation element that I felt where coaches were they were good at understanding you and understanding, how to communicate with different types of players. And then some were not. And so that was always interesting to me. When I was an older player, either in high school or in college, university, I would try to make it a point to get to know the younger players and let them know that, hey, you're part of this team, and try to help mentor them along a little bit. And there was presentation involved there. And then in class, that sort of spilled over into being interested in communication, interpersonal communication, how people perceive messages, the sender-receiver relationship of different messages, and so on and so forth. And so I ended up majoring, my field of study was communication. And then I noticed as I got into my 20s and early to mid 20s, I was going to a lot of weddings. I was a guest. A lot of friends and family members started to get married. And by the time I was in my late 20s, I had been to a lot of weddings and seen so many speeches. So the best man or the maid of honor at a wedding, as well as the parents of the bride or the parents of the groom who got up and spoke, we saw so many speeches, and I noticed that a lot of them were just sort of run of the mill or mundane. A lot of them were forgettable. There were a few disasters, where somebody said something they shouldn't. There were a few that were really, really wonderful, but the vast majority were just, kind of nice in the moment, and then people forgot about them by the end of the night. And so I thought about that and used my communication skills and some of the work I was doing at the time in my 9-to-5 normal job. And I thought that I might be able to offer something. And can I provide a structure and a basic framework without trying to kill anybody's creativity? Could I add something to that standpoint where I could teach people how to give a more rememberable or memorable or unforgettable wedding speech? Because it is a big moment. And a lot of times they're caught on camera. And a lot of times the people getting married, they want to remember that night for the rest of their lives. And that can be a big piece of the puzzle if you can really nail your speech. So that's where the motivation came from. I also gave my older brother a speech when he was getting married in 2012. And I tried to be creative with it. I made the whole thing rhyme, which I think it surprised a lot of people. And it wasn't very long, but there were some jokes and some memories in there that I thought it mixed the emotion a little bit with some humor, and it turned out really well. And after that, a few people started asking me to give them advice on how to give their speech. They said, "Hey, I liked yours. What can I do to make mine kind of like that?" And so after the third or fourth person asked me, "Hey, can you help me with your speech?" I thought maybe there's a market for this, or maybe there's just a large amount of people that would benefit from using some of the same things that I used when I wrote mine.
Yeah. So that's how you ended up in that communication space. Interesting. So let's jump into it. What's the process? Like, how should people prepare for this otherwise super important moment and super important speech by itself? Like, where should they start?
That's a great question. And there's probably no perfect answer here, but in my typical job as well, I'm a facilitator for an organization that does a lot of company culture and team workplace environment consulting. And whether it's in that line of work or whether it's in your wedding speech, two things that I try to keep in mind whenever I'm starting is the first thing and the most important thing anytime I'm going to give a presentation, whether it's wedding speech related or to our corporate group or even at a conference, is I want to put myself in the shoes of the people who will be in the audience. And I always ask myself, if I was sitting in that seat, what would I want? Like, what kind of information would be interesting to me? Whether we can be interactive or not, like, is that something I'd want? I think about myself having to sit through a bunch of boring conversations and speeches before. Like, how can I avoid that? And so I always want to put myself in their shoes and think, okay, if I didn't know the bride or the groom or whoever's getting married very well, what would I want? What would be interesting to me? And so that's where I start. Think about what are the most interesting stories you have, memories that you have. Are there any really, really funny or humorous moments that other people should know about? And then can I connect some of what I know about this person because I know them so well to people that may not know them that well? How can I build a bridge there? And then number two, the other thing that I always think about is I want to show up and I want to own the room. And so I want to think about what are some things, physical things that I can do, or what are some ways I can project confidence when I get up there. Sometimes it has to do with just pausing a few seconds after you get the microphone, just to let people know, hey, it's, I'm on stage here, it's my turn to talk, and waiting for people to give me their full attention. Sometimes it's just slowing down my pace of speaking, but I want to own the room and I want to make sure that I'm putting myself in everybody else's shoes. So before I even write too many words of the speech, I want to think about those things and how I'm going to accomplish those when it actually becomes go time at the wedding.
All right, interesting. So the audience is, again, the most important factor. As with every other presentation in the business world or in the startup world or whatever, every single time, every single moment, every single presentation, it always starts with the audience in mind.
Absolutely.
All right. So the next step is, once you know the audience and what you want to convey to them, you more or less, what I'm hearing you saying is like brainstorming and just throwing every single idea that you have in regards to funny moments, stories, like facts that you know about those people, and from there you are like, okay, how do you go from there? Like you brainstorm everything out. From there, how do you select, how do you choose what should stay, what should be left out? Because I can imagine that sometimes you want to share so many stories, um,
Right.
but you don't have that, like it could be a very lengthy speech this way.
It definitely could. And sometimes we may have stories that we think are great and are memorable, but they're an inside joke between just you and that person, and nobody else will really get it, and they won't feel like they're in on the joke or in on the humor. So when we actually start writing, putting pen to paper or typing in a laptop, we want to get some of those main stories out there just on paper, and it doesn't really matter what order they're in at this point. But I recommend breaking your speech down into 5 different parts,
All
and
right.
and you don't have to necessarily do all 5 of them, but if you want it to feel like a complete speech, I start to bucket those stories and those memories into one of these 5 areas. The first is called the opener. So you want to capture, and I'm sure you cover this all the time. You've got 30 to 60 seconds to capture the audience and make sure that they're going to pay more attention to you than they are to the drink that's at their table, or to get up and use the restroom while you're speaking. So we want to have a great opener, either one line or a few short lines that capture everybody's attention. And part of that is around owning the room as well. So if you can have great eye contact, you can scan the room, pause a couple seconds before you even speak, and then begin with your opener, that's going to capture everybody's attention. That's a great place to start. So we like to use one of the best memories or a quick one-liner or a funny joke just to get people loosened up in that opener. Number 2, we call it honoring the past. And that's, I want to take people down memory lane a little bit to understand better who this person is. And we're not talking lengthy here, a couple quick tidbits about how you met this person or how long you've known them, and how they came into your life, what kind of impact they've had on you. Then number 3 is the present and the future. So I want to take people from where this person has been and where your relationship was before into a little bit about what they're doing with their life right now, how you continue to interact with that person, like how you're proud of them, where you see them heading in the future. And then number 4, you cannot forget the other person, the significant other. If you're the best man, we've got to talk about the bride. So how you met the bride, what kind of interpersonal situations you've been in with the bride, keeping it as positive as possible. We don't want to be criticizing the bride, or if you're speaking on behalf of the bride, you don't want to criticize the other person too much. But if it's in a little bit of a playful way, that's okay, but we've got to keep it positive. So we want to spend about, I believe, 30% of the speech talking about the bride and 70% talking about the groom if you're the best man. So if your friend or brother was giving a speech for you, you'd want them to spend the majority of time talking about you and that person's relationship with you, but also about 30% talking about the other person so they don't feel like they're left out at all. And then number 5 is the big finish. So this is pretty common sense or self-explanatory, but you've got to save one of the best stories or the best toast or a piece of your speech that's, a movie quote or a joke or something that rhymes or something like that, that's going to feel like that mic drop moment where you can wrap things up and people know that the speech is done and they're ready to just break out into thunderous applause. So we call it the opener. Make sure that we nail that and own the crowd. Honoring the past, the present and future are number 3. The significant other is number 4. And then the big finish will send people out on a really high note.
Yeah, that is definitely a structure that everyone that's listening or watching to this one can follow. I can tell you that, like, super practical stuff here. How many? There was a little bit more about, like, based on all of your work, you wrote a full book on it. Like, by the way, first of all, how many times have you heard or have you seen people just winging it? Like, how many times people would just go in there, say something, but behind the scenes is just an improv, and at the end, it's not what it could have been? Like, do you see that often, or Do you see that because of the occasion is so important, people are like, okay, I will spend the needed time to prepare for this one? What's the ratio there? Like, what's happening there?
I've seen probably about 20% of the wedding speeches have been people winging it, and
All right.
they might have one note card with a couple bullet points, but they're not very prepared, and you can tell. I have seen a few people, probably 2 or 3, go up there with no visual aid or no anything, and just start having a hard time right away, and it kind of rambles and it goes in all these different directions. On the opposite side, I have seen a lot of people too, which I'm sure this is one of the number one no-nos in presentation from what your company offers, is people that will be glued to their phone, or they'll be glued to an iPad or a piece of paper, and they're not even looking at the crowd. They're just looking down straight, reading off the paper. And that doesn't convey a message of relatability or of personability either. It's just, hey, I'm going to read this speech directly off. It's like somebody on a PowerPoint slide just looking at the slide, not the audience, reading off the entire slide, where there's way too many words on the slide anyhow. So I've seen those two extremes happen maybe 20% of the time each. And then the other 60% is a much better mix of, I've got some things to read off. Even if you have your entire speech written in front of you, you can do a pretty good job of reading a line or two, then looking up at the audience, giving some of that nonverbal communication where you're smiling at them, making some eye contact here and there, and then not just rushing through it. So yeah, it's probably about 20%. Unfortunately, I wish the number was lower, where people are just winging it.
But by the way, that's not that bad. I was expecting a higher number here, but 20 is, hopefully it will become less and less and
Right.
smaller number with the time, but 20 is not that bad, like in the world of business presentations, I would say that, like, or it's not even me saying it, every single day, even today, like we were working with one of the biggest banks here, and we always ask them, hey, like if you have to consider what you are seeing in the business world or in your organization at the conferences that you go, like how many of the presentations that you see you would categorize as presentations that are truly effective, right? Like if you have to say a number and a percentage of every presentation, all the presentations that you have seen, and you will probably be surprised, but many people say less than 5% of the presentations that they see are truly effective. Of course, sometimes there are people that say 50, 60. Today, one of the people in the group said 65. I was like, I truly hope that's the case for you.
Right.
I truly hope that that's the case for you. And I really hope that will become the new normal for many of us, like 70%, almost 70% of every presentation that you consume to be one that if I ask you to go back in time and ask you, hey, would you go back? For you to say, sure, of course, every time.
Yeah.
70% is a huge number. That being said, 20% is still not that big of a number, but of course,
it could be a lot worse.
Yeah, it could be a lot worse. Obviously, a lot of people are taking that seriously and preparing. How much time do you see people spending, or how much time do you recommend your clients or people that you are working with, like, spend in order for them to like come up with a really, really good speech? Like, is there a magical number? Because every single time people are like, how many times should I rehearse it? How much time should I spend? What are the magical numbers? What are your thoughts on this?
When I've done toast myself, I've given 3 of them. 2 to 3 hours has been about a magical number for me, at least. Because if we're asking people to spend 5 to 10 hours on this toast, no one's getting paid for it. There's a lot of other things going on that day, and it really is an honor that you're being asked. So, if somebody's spending a half hour, 30 minutes on it, that's really not enough to honor the person and to make any sort of impact on that night. I mean, I guess unless you're a professional speaker, a professional improv person. But I think if you're a professional, you would just have it built into you that you'd want to provide practice. Listening to your episode with Scott Allen a couple episodes ago, he talked a lot about that deliberate practice. So if someone's a professional, they're probably going to practice anyhow. But typically what happens is you can write a rough draft in about 30 to 45 minutes by just getting some ideas down there, categorizing them into some sort of chronological order or a framework. If you use the framework from my book, you can do it that way. You can do it in a number of other ways. But in about 45 minutes, we should be able to get some basic rough draft. Well, then you're going to want to go through that about 2 more times. One, to add some more things in where you feel like there's some gaps to fill it in. And then the third time, you'd want to look at the whole process. You want to be refining it. You want to be making sure that everything sounds clear as you're saying it out loud. And then what I always recommend is at least one time, practice it in front of somebody you trust who isn't going to give any of the secrets of the speech away. But somewhere between 1 week and 2 weeks before the wedding, practice in front of somebody else, and then you're ready to give the toast. So, to some extent, the stakes here are not incredibly high, because if you don't do a great job on your wedding toast, you're not getting in trouble. Like, no one's going to be mad at you for a long time unless you say something really regrettable. Yeah. But the majority of them just turn out to be just okay, so, but they're not really memorable. So the stakes aren't incredibly high. And at the same time, the opportunity is great, because you have an opportunity to make an impact, to be one more great memory in a day that's supposed to be one of the best days of the lives of the people who are getting married. So that's what I'd recommend. Like, don't put too much pressure on yourself and say, hey, I've got to spend 5 to 10 hours on this. Just give it 2 hours and just feel, are you ready? And if you don't feel like you're ready, practice it. And if you're still not ready, you can add another half hour or another hour on top of that. But I really think under 5 hours does the trick.
Yeah, but you said something very interesting. I think that you are the people that are preparing for that speech are working on it 1 or 2 weeks before the wedding, which is also, where is this, is that what happens most of the times, or why is it 1 or 2 weeks before the wedding? Because in the most business cases, what you'll see happening, and I think you know it very well, is that people prepare their presentations in the last minute, right? And not before, and not 1 or 2 weeks before they have to deliver it. So where is the 1 or 2 weeks coming from?
For me, it's coming from a place where I want to feel excited and rested when I'm actually going to the wedding. So if you do it 1 to 2 weeks before, sometimes if you're practicing in front of somebody else, that person might cancel your appointment. If you say that you're going to get together with them, they may cancel their appointment with you, and you may have to push it back until closer to. It's just it's a safeguard in place so that we're not waiting until the last minute. It's still a good idea the night before in front of the mirror to practice it in front of yourself. But if you're gonna practice with somebody else, we recommend give yourself about a week, because you might still have tweaks that you want to make, and it guards against, in case you made plans with this person, either you had to change the plans or they had to change the plans, as well as it makes you feel a little more comfortable. Okay, somebody heard it, they gave me feedback, they had time to give me some feedback, and I had some time, at least a few days, to make some changes based on the feedback. Then you're going to do your final run through the night before or the morning of the wedding, but just by yourself. You're going to get comfortable with it one more time, because I really want people, especially if you're nervous to speak in public, that can turn the whole wedding day into me being nervous, biting my fingernails, not really enjoying myself because I either don't feel prepared, or I didn't put the time into it, or I'm just nervous in general because I don't like public speaking. Like, if that's the case for me or the person who's giving it, I want to give them that 1 week in advance or even 2 weeks in advance. Say it in front of somebody else, get some of those nerves out, and the hope is that it's not as difficult and it's not as stressful on the actual day.
Yeah, but it's still important, still, even for people that are, obviously, as you mentioned, if it's a professional speaker, professional presenter, or someone who has experience in presenting, most of the times you would guess that those people will prepare and rehearse it beforehand. Like these, you don't need to advise those people to do it. They know the importance of it. But for those people that are not in that space, or are still questioning whether or not they should rehearse it. I know that stuff, I've written that stuff, I know those people for so long, etc., etc. You still advise them, hey, say this out loud, say it to a friend of yours, see how it goes, get some feedback, maybe fine tune afterwards. That is still an important part, right?
Yes, absolutely. Because, no matter how well you know somebody, you know this, it's a different ball game when you get up on stage or in front of a crowd and there's bright lights facing at you. As a side job right now, I do broadcasting for local sports and football and basketball. And the first time I had to look into a camera, instead of just having a conversation with somebody else, your mind goes blank because you're not used to staring into this one little item. And so you have to get used to that over time. And so if you don't have a lot of experience there, you might know the person better than anybody else in the world. But if you have 200 or more people looking at you and somebody hands you a microphone, your mind could go blank if you haven't prepared for it.
Yeah. And that will happen at some point. It may not be on this wedding, but it will be on the next one, everybody.
Yep.
At
Well, it's
some
happened
point,
to me in corporate presentations. It's happened to me in a lot of different situations. And I heard Scott mention the idea of adapting because things are going to go wrong, or you're just not going to remember what you wanted to say. And I've had those moments in front of 200 people or so in a business setting where I'm trying to lead a class or I'm training on a certain subject, and my mind goes blank, and I have to make a decision in that moment. Are you going to make light of it? Are you going to ignore it? Are you going to turn around and run out of the room? There's a lot of different options, and you want to pick one of the more ideal options, which is, I think, is either turn it into a funny moment or admit that I just forgot what I was going to say. Hold on, I've got it, and then continue on. You can do some of those things, or you can adapt and act like nothing happened and just move on to the next point. But you don't want to be in that moment, more than one time. If it happens to you once, it's okay, but we want to learn from it. And you don't want that first time you're in that deer in the headlights moment to be when you're giving a wedding toast.
Yeah, and I think that Scott, that episode with him was everything that he was talking about, and especially when he talked about the adaptability. I always say, and I mentioned it, I think, in the podcast, or was it, I don't know, as part of our conversations before or after that, I don't know. But we were discussing at some point that, hey, in order for you to be adaptable, you need to be prepared. There is no way for you to adapt on the fly if your brain is thinking about so many other things. There is no way, almost no way, okay, no, not, let's not get into the extremes, but almost no way that you're going to nail that moment if your brain is just trying to do so many other things. Okay, what am I talking about? What's next? What did I say up until? All of those things are going to be in your head constantly. Plus, you now need to adapt. That becomes the most possible thing for everyone.
That's a great point. That's a great point.
I experienced it myself before. When you are not prepared, it's very hard. If something unexpected happens, you just don't have, I like to say, even though I don't know if I'm right in using exactly those words, I just believe that you don't have the mental capacity to process that unexpected situation and react accordingly. You just are so obsessed in thinking about what you need to say and how you need to say it and what's next, and okay, what is the slide behind me and which is the next slide, and is my demo going to work because I haven't tested it, hopefully to work. There are just so many other thoughts in your mind in this moment that if something unexpected happens, it's one more thing now that you need to somehow process and react to, and it's like an overflow. It's
sure.
In programming there is an overflow mistake, an error. It's an overflow. You cannot. It's just it's over.
It one over. Too many thing you can handle. Well, that makes me think too of corporate presentations where a lot of times you don't know exactly how the room is going to be set up when you walk into one of those situations. And so I've walked into a lot of different where I expect there to be a lot of space so we could do some interactive activities. And then there's no space. Or I walk in and expect that they're going to be round tables, but instead they're the 6-foot rectangle tables, and they're all lined up really close together or spread far apart. So that adaptability and that preparation is critical so that you can roll with the punches, or you can improvise when something happens that you're not expecting. Because almost every time I give any sort of presentation, something happens that I'm not fully expecting, but I've already thought about that ahead of time. What would I do in this scenario? What would I do in that scenario? And then even if a scenario presents itself that I've never even seen before, I have so much backlog of preparation in different areas that I can say, oh, you know what? I've tried this before. I'll just see if this works. And if that doesn't work, I have plan B. And it's never a big crisis, like it was once or twice, really early in my career. And then I learned from that and don't make those same mistakes anymore.
Yeah, exactly. I love what you're saying about mistakes. Like, it's okay to do a mistake once, but don't repeat the same mistake ever again. Like, I'm so all in for people also on our team to make mistakes, because there is no way to otherwise try new things, progress
Definitely.
in the first place. But us doing the same mistake again afterwards, that's stupid. Like, this is
Right.
completely unacceptable. Us doing the same mistake more than once is okay. We haven't learned the first time.
Yep.
That is not what we want here. Pete, what else is in that book? I don't have it. I will order it, obviously, but we met online last week. So we scheduled this podcast extremely quickly.
We did, yep.
What also can people expect to see in your book?
Well, the book is called Wedding Toasts 101, and there's a lot of 101 information about just the sort of the mental mindset of giving a toast. We talk a lot about how you don't have to be an experienced speaker to give a great and unforgettable wedding toast. We talk about some of those basics, some of the body language basics when you get up there to project the confidence as well as the friendliness. There are a lot of exercises in the book. So if you're not sure even where to start, or you can't think of any stories off the top of your head, there are a lot of questions, basically coaching questions in the book, that help you jog your memory about who is this person to me? What are some of my favorite memories with them? There's a lot of leading questions like that help you get to that point. There's also several writing prompts where this could be, hey, I've got 10 different options of how you could start your speech. If you're not sure what to do for the opener, I've got 10 or more options of, hey, here's a line of thinking that you could take and pick the one that works best for you. I also have 5 examples of entire toasts. So real speeches, 2 of them that I wrote myself, and then some that people that I've heard from while I was writing the book, and did some reach outs and asked them. I said, hey, I really loved your wedding toast. Would you mind if I put it in the book? People shared that with me. And then the last thing I would say is we cover some of those scenarios that are a little bit unusual too. So what if you have 2 people giving a speech? What if you have co-best men or co-maid of honor? How can they work together and play off each other? What if you want to bring up a guest speaker? What if you're going to do it in some other sort of unorthodox format that you've never experienced yourself, but you've been asked to give this toast, and now, how do you figure that out? That's just one more variable to get thrown into the mix. So I cover a lot of those different types of scenarios. We have a lot of exercises in the book that you can use if you have, if you're reading with a pen and paper, that may be helpful so that you could take some notes. But the idea is once you finish the book, you have all the tools you need to have a great rough draft and know how to deliver it, even if you're not someone who enjoys public speaking.
Sounds great. I will definitely get this one because I'm curious to see the similarities between a wedding toast and a business presentation. Even though, of course, as with the wedding toast, there are so many nuances in the same way as in the business world, there are so many different scenarios that you can get in. But I'm super curious always to find similarities, between things.
Yeah.
So I'll definitely grab that one and take a look. Pete, we always ask people who are on our podcast, who else do they believe we should get on the podcast? And these are people that are either in one way or the other connected to communications or presentations or the presentation space, or someone that they themselves know, but they know these people and would point to those people because they are great presenters. Do you have a name for us? Anybody that's on top of your head? Or is that a hard one now? Let's see how it goes. We just need one name. All right.
Yeah, I didn't come in with a list of names, but there are a lot of people that I admire. Some of them are authors of books that have become famous now. But one thing I wanted to mention was that the book Radical Candor by Kim Scott.
All right,
I know it's a relatively famous book, and she might be a difficult person to get, but who knows?
we'll try.
That concept is around that getting feedback from other people, and the concept that if we care about people, then we will give them honest feedback. So if you're gonna share your podcast, or excuse me, you're gonna share your wedding speech with somebody before the event, you want to make sure that you're getting some real feedback from that person. So that's one I'm enjoying, and that concept that we really like that concept. In terms of others, I have a good friend that runs a podcast called World Class Dads, where he became a dad for the first time not too long ago. And the concept of communicating with a child is an interesting concept, and presenting to the child, as I have a 1-year-old daughter now myself. So I listen to that podcast a lot. And he's had on Joe DeSanta, who started the Spartan race. He's had him on his show, and some other people that talk about how do we become the best dad we can be while still being really successful and ambitious in our professional lives. His name is Brad Mulvey, and I think he'd be an interesting guest from the standpoint of, presenting to children like as a different concept, but somehow related with some similarities to how you would present to adults.
Yeah.
And in fact, a lot of what we do, my full-time job is a company called Culture Shock. What we do is we help people within organizations build trust and accountability within those organizations to make their workplace culture really engaging, so that they attract, engage, and retain the best talent that they can. And when we talk about Culture Shock, we talk about giving great feedback. We talk about accountability and effective communication. We also talk about how to reach adult learners. And a lot of times we use activities that normally you would think of as kids games, but they tend to reach people because they're very simple, and you can find a parallel between what you're doing there, the interactive ability, and what you would be doing in a workplace. So there tends to be a lot of these similarities. So there might be something there. Brad's a good friend of mine, as well as that Radical Candor book. I really appreciate that one as well.
We need to check both him and the author of that book. That will be we'll do our homework there for sure. One last here, that's a two-part question. Obviously, we will make sure that we put a link to the book in the show notes, in the blog, on YouTube, everywhere. However, what is the place where people can find more about the company that you mentioned? Plus, the other part of the question is, which is the best place for people to connect if they have some questions?
Sure. And anybody is welcome to connect at any point with me. The Wedding Toast website is www.weddingtoast101.com. And we have the book available. There are also templates. So I put together templates for a hilarious toast. If you want to make it more funny, it's basically fill in the blank style. Just give you even more of a framework. There's a sentimental toast or an emotional toast. And then there's a last minute toast. So if you do wait till the last minute, I've got a resource that can help people out from that standpoint. My Instagram might be the easiest way to connect with me. And that is PETE. It's at Pete, and then it's OHWAIT. So Pete, oh, wait, because anytime I think I'm prepared for something, oh, wait, I've got one more thing that I need to prepare for before I go into any speech or any presentation. So that reminds me of before I go, the night before anything, oh, wait, what am I forgetting here? And I go back through my checklist one more time. So Pete, oh, wait, on Instagram. Anyone's welcome to connect or send me a DM.
Sounds super cool. All right, that is not that hard to remember. Like this is definitely a tag that you can very easily remember. All right, that was super fun. It's already 40 minutes in. I would say that people won't hear the first intro that we recorded, because I will now stop after we end the recording and re-record the intro, because based on our conversation, I don't like the intro anymore. It needs to be flawless. Thank you so much for all the knowledge that you shared. Super practical things and a super interesting topic, to be very honest. Like, I would say that I'm very pleasantly surprised that a lot of people that, as you mentioned, are spending the time to prepare for that type of speech. That is super nice to hear. I mean, super, super nice to hear. So nice. Thank you
I'm
so
glad
much.
too. And it does feel
Yeah.
like with weddings become even more big business that,
Yeah.
and the fact that you could put your speech on social media now sometimes, and a few of them go viral. If you YouTube, great wedding speeches. So I think some of those things, and the fact that we want to have good clips on Instagram and so on and so forth. And weddings are big business, so you don't want to let somebody down in the middle of a really expensive, really big party. A couple of those things might have contributed, but I have been pleasantly surprised myself, and hopefully with the book available now, that's something that continues to help people elevate their level of speeches. So Boris, I want to thank you too for having me on the show, and I want to wish you the best of luck with your upcoming wedding as well.
Thank you, and thank you for being a guest on the podcast, and thanks for reaching out and just connecting through Scott. It was super nice to schedule that podcast so quick. Everyone, you heard it from Pete. We'll also link up his Instagram, his website, the book, absolutely everything that he mentioned. It will be all everywhere. No matter where you're consuming this episode, just take a look at the notes, take a look at the post, take a look at the description, whatever, like wherever you're looking at this, you will have those things. And also, while we're on the topic, before we end, we always say, hey, take a look at what we're also doing at 356labs.com, not 365 labs. Many people, Pete, still up until today say, how are you guys doing at 365 labs? It's not
356 labs. All right, I've got
preparation. You still need that preparation. It is an important one.
Yeah.
And of course, the Present to Succeed conference, which is now the biggest presentation skills conference in the world. If you don't know about it, go check it out. Thanks everyone for listening. Subscribe, like, follow, comment. You know what to do, and see you in the next one. Thanks again.